Guess which character I'm thinking about. Your clue is that they have white hair and red eyes. If you guess Luffy, then you are correct. If you guess Bonnie, then you're also correct. If you, for whatever reason, guessed Hody Jones, then you're in the minority but still majorly correct. And if you guessed King, then sire, claim your crown. And if you guessed Carrot, Wanda, Inuarashi, Nekomamushi, Beppo, or any of the Sulong minks, then it is a Garchu for you. And we're not even done yet. There are so many correct answers to this question. Because what I've just asked you is one of the most frustratingly vague guessing games that I ever could have conjured. Because a surprising amount of characters in One Piece have this distinctive white hair red eye effect, which generally appears in a transformed state, comes equipped with enhanced abilities, as well as a stamina cost that threatens the life of the user. And if we didn't see the deeper connection going on here, then you could almost accuse Oda of lazy design work. But the white hair and the red eyes are very intentional. It's evidence that every species on this One Piece planet possesses an innate genetic ability to access their own version of the Gear 5th form, their own expression of freedom. And it's no coincidence that the minks, the fishmen, the Lunarians, and the daughter of a buccaneer, the four closest races to the Joy Boy, are the ones who are manifesting this power for their causes. And we're going to see a lot more of that going forward in One Piece. But before we get into it, this video was inspired by Mr. Randy Troy pointing out this connection during the latest Reverie. He has a lot of cool ideas, and there will be a link to his channel in the description below. Check it out. Well, let's begin at the heart of everything, which is always Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy unlocking Gear 5th was not a light switch power-up, meaning that it did not appear instantly as a result of a single moment. It was a very slow process, like leaving a bucket under a leaky tap, drip drip. Luffy's ridiculous power kept building through Gear 2nd, Gear 3rd. Now the bucket's starting to look a bit half full. Then we started to get the deity connotations with Gear 4th, and Snake Man even refined this, until Luffy was finally ready to embrace Gear 5th. Reaching that power was like climbing a very long staircase, with each step unlocking a small part of it. But here's my hypothesis. Luffy is not unique. Everyone has access to this sort of sun god form, however it requires a unique process to reach, and many people simply do not have the drive that Luffy possesses to attain this level of freedom. However, some do, and some have already taken their first few steps towards achieving it, with Jewelry Bonnie being the most successful but nowhere near the only example of this. And when Bonnie first activated her full-on Nika future form, a lot of people were surprised, as if this idea came out of nowhere. What's happening, Oda? Is One Piece fallen off? But it didn't come out of nowhere. This was a very slow process for Bonnie as well. This was the freedom that she had been working towards her whole life, which admittedly is only 12 years, but if anything, that should just make you feel worse about what you've done with your life. I know that it certainly makes me question my personal decisions, but Bonnie had something of a nepotistic advantage, as she was indoctrinated into the Church of Nika by her father, Bartholomew Kuma, renowned buccaneer, and so Bonnie had that core belief instilled in her from a very early age. That is an important factor. Without that belief, Bonnie could not have achieved this. And when she ran away from the Sorbet Kingdom, she did exactly what Luffy did by conjuring her own version of Gear 3rd to defeat Alpha, and took a step towards unlocking the Nika power just like Luffy did during Enies Lobby. But it was only through Luffy's inspiration on Egghead Island that Bonnie was able to complete the transformation and don the iconic white hair and red eyes. In Bonnie's case, she reached the pinnacle of freedom through her own unique mechanism, a devil fruit which allows her to manifest multiple futures so long as Bonnie believes that those futures can exist. So you might think that this is an exception to the rule, an outlier created by a stupidly overpowered fictional fruit, and you can also argue that taking on the white hair and red eyes are a result of Bonnie plagiarizing Luffy. In a vacuum, that's pretty fair. But what's a lot harder to explain is that this power can and has been reached with other special powers that are not devil fruit related in complete isolation to Luffy. A prime example of which can be found in the strangely similar white hair, red-eyed Sulong transformations of the Mink tribe, which are often referred to as the true power or the true form of the Minks. At the time that this happened, we didn't quite know enough about this to make any sort of world-shaking connections, and evidently nor did the anime staff, because originally in the anime they changed Carrot's voice to sound different in Sulong form, but they did later drop this, which is important because for the sake of consistency, voices do not change in the Sun God form, which this isn't, but it's almost certainly a step on the staircase to freedom, like how Luffy's gears were his steps. It's something that have allowed the Minks to get 1 degree closer to their true form, which is also startlingly similar to how Luffy describes the Gear 5th sensation. And this transformation was achieved by the Minks via their own unique methodology. The Sulong transformation is initiated by looking at the full moon, and they must have a completely unobscured view of the moon, meaning that this entire race is hard counted by Nami conjuring a cloud. But I also do want it on the record that the moon is not an essential part of this transformation. It can be achieved through other avenues, as we'll discuss later, but the cost of the Sulong form is in concert with the cost of Gear 5th. If the minks cannot control their transformation, then they can quite literally fight themselves to death in a single night simply because they expend too much energy. And the same thing happens to Luffy in Gear 5th. He uses it until he reaches a point where all of his energy vanishes, leaving him on the verge of death, if not arguably dead. Now, this can often comically be fixed by feeding Luffy food. That's the most common way to deal with it. However, things do get a lot more desperate as well, such as that one time during the raid on Onigashima where Luffy had to restart his own heart against Kaido. If Luffy wasn't who he is, then this transformation would have killed him many times over. Probably not many times, just once, because he wouldn't have had the opportunity for the rest. But it's not something that Bonnie was able to maintain for more than a couple of minutes, and the Sulong form initially wasn't something that Carrot could maintain for any longer than a few minutes either. It's exhausting, and it will cost your life if you ignore that exhaustion. I should say the Gear 5th and the Nika form are also obviously symbolic of the sun, whilst the Sulong form is more of a representation of the moon. And to that, what I would offer is that this form may have been developed a millennia ago after Joy Boy was defeated and the world began its long night. With no sun to turn to, the Sulong form was perhaps symbolically developed as a way to protect the world during the night, something to replicate the hope of the sun god Nika one day returning, and to the credit of the minks, it does appear to have worked for them, because it gave them the power to protect their civilization for the last 800 to 900 years. And they're not the only civilization to have come up with a method like this, because fishmen have also managed to achieve a white hair red-eye transformation thanks to the energy steroids that once resided within the Tamatibako, which currently doesn't reside anywhere because it blew up. But this was actually something of an ancient relic said to give people the power of growing older, as well as to make one as strong as 1,000 men. But in regards to the first one, Vanderdecken actually planned to use its power on Shirahoshi to make her old enough for it to be socially acceptable to marry her, but little did he know that it's not socially acceptable for anyone to marry Vanderdecken, no matter what the age or any other demographic happens to be. Now, one of the more obvious messages of the energy steroids is that drugs are pretty bad. Don't do them because your unearned power comes with great consequences, like draining your life force and leaving you on the verge of death. You know, the same thing that Gear 5th and the Sulong transformations do, so we're seeing many a pattern emerge here. However, there's also some special mythology behind this particular consequence. The Tamatibako was a mysterious box that was given to Uroshimataro by Otohime, the princess of the sea, and he was given this box with the explicit instructions to never open it, and look, long story less long, Uroshimataro did eventually open it, and with it a white puff of smoke emerged, poof, and he was instantly transformed into a white-haired old man. And this was because during the short time that he spent at Otohime's palace, many decades had passed in the real world. Time was functioning differently, so the Tamatibako was used to quite literally store Uroshimatara's old age that he should have incurred, and did after he opened it. And you can see how a lot of this folktale inspired what happened on Fishman Island, which had its own Otohime, and the consequences of consuming the pills in the Tamatibako led to the rapid aging of the new Fishman pirates. But while thematically appropriate, again, this effect is not unique. Whether it's devil fruit, whether it's moon, or ancient drugs, the same thing happens. The user assumes a white-haired, red-eyed form, and then their stamina is rapidly drained, leaving them on the verge of death, if not outright dead. But also, the energy steroids are not a light switch power-up to access the Sun God form, or a step along the way to the Sun God form, and they didn't turn Hody into his white-haired incarnation immediately. It was a gradual process of increasing substance abuse. In fact, the first time we saw him use them, all it did was strengthen him and turn his eyes red. Although this is different in the anime because Toei initially gave Hody crimson bloodshot eyes with blue pupils. However, this is incorrect. In the manga, Hody's eyes are depicted in the exact same way as everyone else who gains access to the white hair red-eyed form. And of course, to access this form, Hody had to OD on the energy steroids, which had him in excruciating pain on the verge of death, before settling into the apparently transracially iconic white hair red-eye aesthetic, which sounds like a very artificially induced version of Luffy's Gear 5th Awakening, where he was pretty much killed by Kaido before the ability could manifest. And I would offer the same explanation for the existence of the energy steroids as I did for the Sulong transformation. During the Void Century, after the defeat of Joy Boy, the fishmen needed a way to protect themselves, and so they sought to emulate the Sun God powers as best they could and rationed the mountain pill form to survive the long night. But some races in the One Piece world are also much further along in this process and did not require an artificial awakening. Which brings us to the Lunarians, who, as far as we're aware, all have white hair. And when I say all Lunarians, I do of course mean King, but also every Seraphim that has been created with his Lunarian bloodline elements has gone on to have white hair as well. But King himself also has red eyes, although they are quite muted, and sometimes the anime even kind of forgets that King has red eyes because he's quite commonly just given black eyes for reasons. But at this stage, I think that even the most skeptical of fictional pirate appreciators can see that this probably isn't a coincidence, because we now have 3 ancient races directly connected to Joy Boy who share the white hair, red eye features, as well as the Joy Boy himself, Luffy. And really, what I'm waiting for on Elbaf is another similar white hair, red eye effect with the giant, because they're also connected to the sun god, and perhaps on an even deeper level than the previously mentioned races. If this trend continues, we will definitely see it in one of them as well. Perhaps even Loki will reach this level due to his insistence that he is a sun god himself. But Lunarians as a whole are another reference to the moon, and perhaps a race that were determined to protect the world during the long night. However, unlike the minks and the fishmen, they had a much rougher go of things and appear to have been hunted to functional extinction. Currently, it's only through the power of brain science that Lunarians have continued to propagate, and that would of course bring us to the Seraphim. And while the Seraphim do have white hair, they do not have red eyes. What they've got is yellow eyes with a funky star in the middle, although S-Hawk is an exception to this, as he also has an outer circle of orange surrounding the standard Seraphim yellow, which no doubt has to do with the secret behind Mihawk's special eyes. But in lieu of that, a lot of the Seraphim have also been dressed in all white outfits, which I imagine could be a reference to their angelic inspiration, but also it draws pretty direct similarities to Luffy's all-white Gear 5th outfit. Although there are exceptions to this as well, like S-Bear, who was given his special star top, and S-Flamingo, who was given a lovely Hawaiian shirt. But for the most part, the Seraphim do also embody the Gear 5th aesthetic. In fact, if you took Luffy, Bonnie, the Seraphim, the Minks, the Fishmen, and the Lunarians, put them in a room with some ancient drugs on a night with a full moon, then you would have an accidental white party. No one came to the event thinking that that was the dress code. It's just how an almost absurd amount of One Piece characters seem to look when they've reached the peak of their abilities. And by the way, the Seraphim are also referred to as the Saikyo no Jinrui, which means the strongest form of humanity. So this is what peak humanity looks like. White hair, white clothes, wacky eyes. And the Seraphim were created by Vegapunk as his way of showing us what humanity has the potential to become. And each race seems to have developed their own unique pathway and their own journey to this peak. However, these roads are not exclusive, as Chopper seems to have developed his own version of the drugs that were in the Tama Tobacco, not on purpose but naturally through his research, and he's now given Minks a quick and dirty way to access the Sulong form in the odd event that they don't get attacked during the evening of a full moon, as we saw with Beppo. And there are also hints to this idea baked very early on into the One Piece cake, as the nation of Alabasta also has its own version of the energy steroids. This is a concoction called Hero Water, which the 4 Sumurageri guards consumed in order to take on Crocodile, which significantly boosted their strength and speed, but significantly unboosted their living capacities as they all proceeded to die, quite sadly. And what's obviously missing here is that they didn't get the white hair or the red eyes. But my meta reasoning for that would be because this was just so early on in One Piece that Oda hadn't thought of the form yet, because the existence of the Hero Water does make a lot of sense, as Alabasta is another one of those nations linked to Joy Boy via its ancient monarch Nefertari Lily. And all of these phenomena, especially the white-haired ones, seem to be linked by Joy Boy. The Fishmen, who were directly associated with him via their ancient princess, the Minks, whose civilization is built on Zunesh's back, who was a comrade of Joy Boy, and the Lunarians, something. I don't know exactly what their connection is yet, but King likes Joy Boy. So it is currently my belief that deep down in every being, even you, somewhere there is the ability to access this pinnacle of freedom. Usually transformations in One Piece are a sign of an altered lineage factor. That's the explanation for how devil fruits work anyway. You consume the magical fruit and it restructures the user's lineage factor to accept this new reality. However, this white hair, red-eyed phenomena cannot be explained by that. Sure, you could argue that the energy steroids and Chopper's drug may temporarily alter this lineage factor. However, the Minks and the Lunarians at the very least possess these traits naturally, and it's a common trait that is manifested across 4 different species now. So I believe that it's something latent in all people that ensures that the will of Nika will never die, as each person has a potential to become a sun god and continue the legacy. And what this means for One Piece going forward is no doubt a hell of a lot more white hair and red-eyed people emerging within the most unexpected of characters as they rise up to enact the dawn of the world.